Alrighty, CNT125. The first orientation podcast, we did a little bit of orientation on the computers, the lab table, the power switches for the routers and switches in the rack, the outlet boxes and patch cables, and we even talked a little bit about the routers and switches that are in our equipment rack. This podcast is going to walk you through, once you get to the lab room, get things powered up and turned on, how we're going to console in to the router and switch for configuration purposes. We're going to start doing that almost right away in the semester. So in the first podcast, I showed you the USB to serial port adapter and also the blue console cable that we have located in the equipment rack at the side of the room. So once I've gotten my blue console cable and I've connected to my USB to serial port adapter, I take that RJ45 and I plug it into the console port on the router switch I want to configure. I need to look for that console port. It is an RJ45 port, but it says next to it the word console, and many times in the same blue lettering or blue font, if you will, as the console cable. So, excuse me. So in this one, I've taken it and plugged it into my very top switch in the rack. The console port's on the back, I plugged it into it, and I have the physical cabling done, and now I need to use or set up the program to be able to console in to that switch. Okay, so since this USB to serial port adapter plugs into a USB port, and our computer has multiple of them, when I plug it into a USB port, it might not be the same as your lab partner's computer, because it might actually be in a different USB port number. So what is wise is if I open my device manager and take 2 seconds and go to the ports area, this is where those serial ports are located. This one tells me that this USB to serial port adapter, USB to serial COM port adapter, is in the 5th USB port, so they're calling it COM5. If I take a mental note of that, that'll be the setting I need for my program. Now, your lab partners might be plugged into the 4th USB port, so it'll come up COM4. Your other lab partner next door might be plugged into the 3rd USB port, so it's going to come up COM3. Okay? So you might want to just double check what yours is. And if you kind of leave it there, you should be able to keep using that same COM port setting. Or if you sit down someday and it's not working, you can quick verify this and know, oh, that's the COM port setting I need. So I'm going to be looking at COM5 when I use my programs. Now, there are 2 different programs we can use to connect from our PC over to the router and switch to send commands to it and have results sent back. We can either use the PuTTY application down here, or we can use the MOBA Xterm. It really doesn't matter to me which one you use. I'm going to quick show you both. We tend to use a lot of PuTTY in my podcast for you, so I'm going to start with that, but I'm also going to show you MOBA Xterm as well. Now, this is a console port program. This is a terminal emulation program. What this program does is allows me to type commands. Those commands get sent through that serial to console cable into the switch. Those commands get executed on the switch, and then the results get sent back through this cable to be displayed on my screen. So this program is that interface between my computer and the router and switch we're working on. So I'm going to load PuTTY here. I'm going to double click on it to load it. And up here, I'm going to look for serial port setting. And it says COM1 right now, but I want to change that to COM5. That's what my computer is currently using. So I'll say COM5, and I'm going to make that the default setting. So I'll highlight default and do save. So that should stay for me if I keep using this computer. I'm going to do open, and right now I have a connection to this switch that I'm connected to, but nothing's displaying. That's correct. I have not sent any commands to it, so the switch is not sending any replies to me. If I hit the enter key a couple times, I should see something start popping up on my screen. In this case, the switch is asking me, would you like to enter initial system configuration dialog? I don't. That's a setup program. I'm going to say no. I don't ever want to use this setup program, and now I get a switch prompt. If I hit the enter key a couple times, I just keep saying that switch prompt. And now I can do things like enable, and I can do things like show run. and it'll actually show me the running configuration on my switch. I am now communicating with this switch, and it's sending results back to me. This is the initial thing I want you to do in our orientation lab. Just get connected to it and send a couple commands and get a couple results back. Now, at this point, if I want to, I can go to my session here, and I can go to change the settings, and I'm using my serial connection. Okay, there's the settings I would need. But I can also go to appearance and adjust the size. If I need the font size a little bit larger for my eyes, I can apply that. And now to make it a little bit easier for me to see what I'm typing and getting results back. That might be a handy little thing to know. In labs, we're going to typically take a result like this and we're going to highlight it. And we're going to do like Control C and open something like a notepad program and end up pasting those results into submit along with our lab, especially as we get done with configuring a switch or router in the lab room, something like that. So there's how we get into, or console into, in this case, the switch. If I move this console cable over, I'm going to close this notepad. I'm not going to save what I need. If I just move this console cable over, so bear with me 1 second while I stand up here, I'm going to move this console cable down to the router that's in my rack, and all I did was I plugged it into the console port on the router. If I hit the enter key a couple times, it's going to say, do you want to enter configuration dialog? No, I do not. That's a setup program I don't want to use. Hit the enter key a couple times. It's going to finish booting, and I should then see a router prompt because I've moved my console cable into the router. We're going to let it finish booting here a second. There we go. Enable, and we'll do a show run on this guy. And now I'm looking at the router configuration. You noticed I didn't need to close out my session and start it again. I just moved the cable over to the router in this case to work on that. I can do that. I can keep this session going and move the cable around to my different devices for configuring my networks. That is a handy little tip. That is a handy little tip that will save you some headache this semester. All right, again, here I would commonly, after a lab is done, highlight this configuration here. I'm going to scroll down to select it all. I'll do a Control C to copy. And again, I would open something like a notepad. We use notepad a lot because it's a very small file size. And I'm going to right click, paste it in, and this is the thing I would save to submit with my lab. Something like that. So there's how we console in using PuTTY. Okay, I'm going to close that again. I'm not going to save that. I'm going to close my PuTTY session out. I'll put him back in the corner down here. I'm now going to use this MOBA X term and do the same thing. Again, I'm going to keep in mind that I'm on COM5. I'm going to open this guy up. And over here, it looks like there was a previous session. I'm going to delete that real quick, just so you can see what it would look like normally. It would start up something like this. And I would need to start a new session. And there's all kinds of options up here. We're going to do session. We're going to create a new session. And we're going to pick, again, SSH, Telnet. There's some of these we're going to end up using as the semester goes. We're going to scroll over here to serial. And we're going to pick a session to use. Well, this, and if I hit the drop down, actually shows COM5 USB to serial COM port adapter. I can actually use that right there and just say OK. I'm going to say OK. And it'll end up saving that over here for me. So if I hit the enter key a couple times, here's the router that I am here's the router that I'm in at present. All right, so here we're logged in. If I do the same show run that we did before, let me click back in there. Show run. I should see my running configuration like I did in PuTTY. And again, I would typically then, when we're done with the lab, scroll up here, highlight my configuration. And just like we did with PuTTY, we can do a Control C, open something like Notepad, and then right click or Control V, paste it in there. And that would be the configuration I would save at the end of the lab. On Hyperterminal, I believe if you go to settings here, and in the terminal, I believe we can adjust the size of our font again. We'll make that a little bit larger. So I can close this session out and relaunch this session. And it should show me a larger font size, I believe. I believe. Let's do this right here. We'll exit. We'll relaunch. We'll open our COM5, and I believe it should show a larger font size for us. Maybe, I think that was. Maybe we'll go a little bit larger and see. So we'll close that out. We'll start that guy back up. Whoops. Oh, actually, I think I would need to, on this guy, I think I need to actually delete this setting and just start a new session. So if I do a, oh, nope, I want to do a, start a new session. We'll go over here to serial. We'll go to COM5, open. There we go. Once I actually kind of reset that session, then I would have a larger font size if it's easier for you to see. So there real quickly is, once we have things cabled up, you know, our console cable into our router switch, I can use either, in this case, Mobile Xterm or PuTTY, it does not matter which one, to console into my router and switch for configuration purposes for the semester. That is part of the orientation lab you'll be doing. Once you get in the lab room, I'm going to have you do some basic IP settings kind of thing. Then we're going to do some consoling in the routers and switches. And then we're going to do the same kind of thing in Packet Tracer to refresh our memory on all of those things. So there is our second part of our orientation for our lab room.